Hi, it's Jen and welcome back to my channel, and in this video I'm going to be talking about my knitting journey so far. If you like my channel for my neuroscience videos, don't worry, my next video coming out will be on the neuroscience of circadian rhythms. So if you want to skip this video and stay tuned for that one, go right ahead. And if you want to learn more about my knitting journey so far, you can continue watching this video. So I started learning how to knit this last October. So the October of 2019. And in my last video mentioned, I was in a job and was feeling really stressed and maybe even depressed. And learning how to knit and crochet really got me out of my depression. And then I may have gone on to become quite addicted to knitting. And now I think I'm at a healthier place where I knit when I have the free time, but I'm not knitting constantly, which I think is a good thing. But it has been a really fun thing for me to do. It is really nice because it gets me in the flow state. It also makes me creative, and it's just a really cozy, comforting activity to do. So I love it overall. Let me just kind of share how it all began. So I listened to this podcast called Let It Out by Katie Delbout, and she had this person on her podcast named London Kay. And London Kay is a yarn bomber. So she makes these huge crochet art pieces and puts them up in cities, and they're just super, super cool. But what really got me interested in learning how to crochet from listening to her podcast was just how meditative it was for her and how it's her favorite thing in life by far. And I was just like, wow, like the way this girl talks about crochet, she's so excited and passionate about it, and it just seems like it lights up her whole life. Like, I want something in my life like that. So I bought her book and I started learning how to crochet. So her book is called Crochet with London Kay, and I'll show you like an example of one of her yarn bombs. She has this one, it says Adore to Another Dimension. She just has a lot of really cool pieces. And from listening to her podcast and wanting to learn how to crochet, I was really inspired by the idea of yarn bombing. And I was living in San Francisco at the time, so when I would like walk to my to the subway or just around the city, I would like be looking at different fences and different places and having all these creative ideas of what I would want to do if I was to yarn bomb in San Francisco. Like, one of the things I was thinking about was, like, in San Francisco there's not really a fall like I have in upstate New York, so I thought it would be cute to like make some leaves and make some fall leaves and like make a kind of like a fake fall in San Francisco. I just took off my sweater because it is July and I was getting hot, but I wanted to wear my knits during this video because it's about knitting, but maybe I'll just wear them for a few minutes at a time because it is too hot today. So I started to learn how to crochet, and I never actually got around to yarn bombing and making yarn bombs, but I did make a scarf. So I'll show you my scarf that I made. I was working on this 24/7 and it was really fun for me and I love it. And it was my first scarf I made this time around. I actually did learn how to crochet in 2014, and I crocheted this like blue and green striped scarf, and it was all in one crochet pattern called single crochet. So I already had a little bit of a background in crochet, so it was pretty easy for me to pick up. And this scarf is just like a single crochet, one row, and then double crochet and going back and forth. So it was pretty easy and it was really relaxing and fun to work on. And I was thinking I would show you guys what crochet looks like versus knitting, like when you're doing it. So this is what it looks like, but I think I want to show you like how it's done. So this is what a crochet hook looks like, whereas in knitting you use 2 needles, which I'll show you in a second. And I'm just gonna do a few crochet things to see, so you can see what it generally looks like, except I am super slow at it right now because I haven't done it in forever. And I think I made my row before this a little too tight, so it's really hard to get into the loops right now. So you shouldn't really be using your fingers as much as I am, but this is the general gist of how to crochet. So now I'm going to show you a little bit what knitting looks like. So here's 2 needles, and I'll just knit for a second so you get the gist. And I will be talking about what this is I'm knitting. later on in the video, so you can look forward to that. So again, those little clips are not meant to try and teach you how to crochet or knit. I just wanted you to like kind of see what they look like and know what the difference is, because I feel like a lot of people might not know the difference between crochet and knitting. So after I knit this scarf, I was like, okay, I want to learn more. I want to be able to like learn new kind of stitches, and I want to be able to learn in person. So I tried looking for crochet classes in San Francisco, but I couldn't really find anything. But what I did find was knitting classes. So that's how my knitting journey began. So in my knitting class, the objective of the class was to end up making a hat like this. So this hat has 2 stitch patterns in it. It's just a knit stitch, which is like the V's, and then a purl stitch, which is like the more horizontal things. So we learned the knit stitch the first class, or the first class we might have just learned how to cast onto the needles, then we learned knit, then we learned purl. And so between classes, we would practice what we learned. So we had a whole yarn, a ball of yarn to practice on. So the first week I like knit it up until I finished the yarn, and then they unraveled it in class, and then the next week I did it all again, doing the knit and purl. Whereas we really only needed to do like a few inches for homework, but I was just so addicted to it and loved learning and wanted to really get the motions down fast. So I started knitting pretty fast, even while I was in the class, and I made this hat. And I made this hat about 9 times, like not during the class, but just overall, because it was around the holiday season. So I made some for all my 3 brothers, my mom, my grandma, my uncle, 2 of my best friends. I made this hat so many times, but it's just super easy and addictive, and I was just making it while I was watching lots of TV, which maybe not be the best thing, but it was so therapeutic and relaxing for me at the time. So I'll show you, this is like the second time I made this hat, a little bit different, just shorter, but I made it a lot. Before I made the hat, like I said, between classes, we were practicing purl and knitting, and I finished my practice yarn and I was just addicted and wanted to learn more. So I went to a local yarn store and got this really pretty yarn, and it's hand dyed and it's so beautiful. And I made this scarf while I was taking the class, and it's great and so pretty and inspiring, and it made me want to learn how to hand dye my yarns as well. I haven't gone around to doing it yet, but it's something that inspires me a lot. And then during the holiday season, after making that same kind of hat so many times, I decided I would make a new kind of hat for my mom for the holidays. So I made her this hat, which is like consists of all the same kind of stitches that I just talked about, but kind of shifted each row so it looks a little different. So I think that's a really fun and cool hat. Just show you what the hats look like on. So this one looks like a little like this. This is what this one looks like on me. Nice little hat. So I started my knitting class the first week of October, and by October 26th, I was inspired to make my first sweater, which I'll show you right now. So this is the first sweater I ever knit, and it's called the Pixelated Cardi. Let's see if I can show you the back as well. So this yarn is by a brand called Knit Collage, and the owner of Knit Collage has a podcast called the Collage Creative Podcast. So when I started knitting, I was really inspired to listen to a lot of different knitting podcasts, and my favorite one so far is the Collage Creative Podcast. And on it, you hear people talk about how they got into knitting, how it's impacted their lives, and what it's like running their small businesses. So it's a really enjoyable podcast, and so her name is Amy Small, and she also has a Facebook group, and she does knit alongs where she releases different patterns from her business, and then she makes videos teaching you how to make the sweaters, and you just have a community that you're making your sweater with as you're doing it, and it's really fun. And it was so nice as a beginner knitter to have this community and have these very clear videos on how to make the sweaters. And this honestly, for a first sweater, might be a little advanced because it has lots of increases and this color work pattern, but I still felt really safe doing it because I had all of these videos walking me through how to do it. And it's knit in very bulky yarn, So it didn't take too long to make, so that also made it pretty accessible for me as a first-time sweater maker, and it was really nice to make. And there was some trial and error on it. I think my gauge might have been a little tight, even though I did a gauge swatch and it looked like it was the right thing. I ended up, like, if I followed the directions, it would have stopped around here. So I had to add more on, and I had to order more yarn throughout the process, which was pretty crazy because she was sold out on her website, so I had to find different yarn shops that would have it. But it all worked out in the end, and it's one of my favorite sweaters to wear. So I started this sweater on October 26th and finished it on November 26th. So I think that's pretty crazy that I think I started knitting around like October 7th, and I started knitting my first sweater within the first month of knitting. So just want to put it out there that if you're learning how to knit or you've been knitting for a while, making a sweater is totally doable. You know, you learn your knit stitch, you have purl stitch. Really the only difference that you're adding on is learning how to do increase stitches, and you have to follow your work a little bit and focus a little bit when you're doing these shoulders where you're increasing and changing the size of things. But even after that, it's really easy. So I recommend doing sweaters, and making sweaters is just a lot more fun for me than making little hats and scarves. So I highly recommend working on sweaters if you are a knitter. And I think it's also impressive that I knit this in about a month. So even as a beginner, you can knit something and finish it fast when you're, especially when you're using super bulky yarn like this. I remember I was working on this around like Thanksgiving time, and it was really fun to work on the plane and just in general. So it's fun. So this sweater is called Marley Bird's First Sweater. I'll show you the front and back. It's a very simple sweater, and it's designed for people to make it as their first sweater. So I was working on this while I was working on the pixelated cardi, and I decided to order it around the same time because I figured if I get to a point in my pixelated cardi where I make a mistake and can't work on it for a bit, I want another project to be able to work on. So I got this. So this one is easier to make in the sense of its design, where it's made in 4 different pieces and then you seam it all together at the end. So you make the front, the back, and then the 2 sleeves. The front and the back are identical and the 2 sleeves are identical. So it's pretty easy, but it did take much longer to make because the yarn is much thinner. And this sweater was like never really my priority when making it because I was excited by other projects. Like I made another knit collage sweater in the span of when I was still working on this one. But even though it wasn't my favorite sweater while I was knitting it, it's actually one of the sweaters I wear the most because it's just really nice. The gauge on it is kind of loose, so it's not too hot. So it's like the perfect weight that I like to wear around my house when I'm just like lounging around. So I actually surprisingly wear it a lot, even though when I was making it I wasn't as obsessed with it, because knit collage yarn is on the expensive side because it's just so beautiful and handmade, whereas this yarn, it was much cheaper. You can get it from like just like big stores, like maybe even like Walmart or Red Heart or something like that. So I wasn't as like obsessed with it while I was making it, but I actually wear it a ton. So I do like it, and it's a good one to start with if you're a beginner. But at the same time, since the yarn is smaller, it takes a lot longer, so it might not be as encouraging. So honestly, if I was recommending something to a beginner, I would recommend something with a simple pattern like this one, but that uses super bulky yarn, just so you can like feel that excitement of finishing a sweater like in a month. Because I started this one around November 15th and finished it like February 28th. So that's November, December, January, February. It took about 3.5 months to make, whereas the other one took 1 month. But then again, I was working on other projects while I was doing it, but I don't know. I recommend super bulky for projects, but this is also a really nice sweater and very comfortable, and I also like it. So this is Sun Woven, which is the second knit collage sweater that I made. I'll show you the front and back as well as some pictures in a second. But yeah, this sweater was super fun because it's made with a lot of different yarns by Knit Collage, and they're all just so cool and inspiring. Just give you like a little close-up as them. And they really inspire me to want to be able to make my own art yarns myself. But for now, I just really enjoy wearing knit collage stuff and knitting with knit collage stuff. But yeah, I started this one on December 15th and finished it on January 26th. So it took a little over a month to make for me. And yeah, just panning down so you can see it again. And this one is constructed very similarly to the one about Marley birds. You make the front, the back, the sleeves. Well, actually, no. You make the front and then the back, and then you seam that two together, and then you knit the sleeves in the round. So it's a bit different than that, but it was similar in the sense that there was some seaming to do. And then because there's so many stripes, there's lots of ends that I had to weave in at the end. So I remember I would binge watch The Witcher while I was weaving in the ends. So whenever I think of The Witcher, I think of weaving in the ends of this sweater. But yeah, this is my favorite sweater to wear around the house when it is a little bit cooler out. So right now the Marley bird is the go-to, but when it was colder out, this was my go-to, and I was wearing it all the time. And I also I wear it in public more often than I wear the Marley bird one in public. So it might be one of my favorites overall. I think it is. And then the pixelated cardi is like my next favorite to wear in public, but actually, well, I just finished a new one that might be my new favorite, but I'll get to that more towards the end. The next thing I learned to knit is this cowl, and it requires a stitch called brioche. And just from listening to the Collage Creative podcast and other knitting podcasts, I've heard so many people talk about brioche and how it's so hard, and people either really love it or they really hate it. So I was feeling up for the challenge of wanting to learn brioche. So this is called the beginner brioche pattern. And at the time I was taking knitting classes with the person who taught me how to make this hat, and she herself hates brioche and didn't want to teach it because she knew that she might mess up. So I had to actually go to a different knitting class to learn how to do the brioche. So that was kind of fun and exciting to meet a new group of people. I went to one class, started this on January 9th and finished it in a week, and it wasn't too hard for me. I actually really liked it. I thought I was going to start doing so many more patterns in brioche. I found sweater patterns in brioche, but I actually just got caught up doing other sweaters, so I haven't done brioche since doing this, and I know if I was going to do brioche again, I would have to reteach it to myself, but I definitely don't hate it, and I think it can make some really cool things because, I think the way that this is striped can really only be done in brioche, so I think that's really cool, and it's just fun to do things more than just the knit stitch and the purl stitch. So I think that if you have never tried brioche and you're interested, it's worth a try. I know a lot of people hype it up to be this really hard thing, but it might not actually be that hard. I think maybe it's hard for people if you have been knitting for a very long time and have a certain pattern of doing things. Maybe it throws you off to do it in a different way, but if you are flexible, you might be able to learn it. So I thought it was fun. Beginner brioche pattern, check it out. So this is the On Repeat Pullover by Yarnspirations, and it's made with really cheap yarn, just like the Marley bird sweater. And it was a difficult one to start. There's really difficult increases around here, and I had to go get help from a yarn shop to try and figure out what was going on. I think they're called German short rows. But yeah, when I was doing the gauge swatch, I was really careful to make sure I was doing the right gauge, and I did about 2 needle sizes lower than the recommended so that I would fit gauge. But then when you knit with these 2 different colors, there's floats behind it, and it makes it tighter. So I think that when I was doing the gauge, I should have actually done the gauge with the 2 colors rather than just 1 color as was recommended for the gauge swatch. So this came out a lot tighter than I think it should have, so it makes me not want to wear it as much. So and it was supposed to be long sleeve, but I just decided to make it short sleeve because it is so tight. It's so hot that I don't think I'll ever wear it long sleeve, and I'm also not really wearing it short sleeve as well, and I haven't even finished weaving in the ends because I'm just not that excited about it. And maybe I could frog it out and start it over from scratch and make it with larger needles so it's not as hot, but I don't know if I'm ever gonna do that. I really thought the colors were super cute, and that's why I decided to get this yarn and make it, but I don't know. I think I just want to make other sweaters, and I don't know, maybe find a smaller person to give this to. that would be nice. So I don't know if anyone on here is very petite and wants this, I'd be happy to give it to you because I want it to have a home and to be worn. But it's just too tight and small for me personally. So I started this one on January 17th and finished it around April 27th. So I was working on it in those early days when I came home, was living back at home at the beginning of quarantine. So it's been through a lot, this sweater, but I am, happy to give it away because I think it's cute. It's just too tight for me. So as soon as I finished the on repeat pullover, I started working on this, which is the Weekender by Andrea Mowry. And it is probably my new favorite sweater. It's made with yarn from Neighborhood Fiber Co. and it's hand dyed and I really love it. And just as I was knitting it, I loved watching the colors change, and it really also inspires me to hand dye my own yarn. So I started it towards the end of April and finished it a few days ago, so it took about 2.5 months to make, which is actually a lot faster than I thought because I was like barely working on it. But I guess when I did work on it, I was working on it a lot. It was annoying because I had to do this sleeve multiple times because I was using one ball of yarn that was like dyed differently than the rest, so I had to take that out, and then the next time I did it, the sleeve came out too large, so I had to start it over, and then I added some decreases. I don't know why it came out differently, but I made the sleeve about 3 or 4 times. But now that it's finally done, I am so excited to wear it. So now I'm going to rewind a little bit to talk about some cowls that I was working on while I was working on the Weekender. And I think it's also interesting to point out that my breakup happened around March 16th, and I actually didn't feel like knitting for a really long time. I was crying a lot and just scraping by, and I was a little turned off by knitting because I was like, maybe knitting is the part of the reason why I broke up. Maybe I was too into knitting, like knitting is just a waste of time. I had some of those thoughts. So it wasn't until around like late April, like April 27th, I started working on the Weekender again. And then on April 28th, I knit this thing up. So it is very similar to my Sunwoven knit collage sweater. And you can just see some of these like really beautiful, inspiring yarns. And it became therapeutic again for me to knit with this again. I feel like knitting with super bulky yarn is just the coziest and easiest and the most relaxing. So it was nice for me to get back to this and realizing that knitting, it can be a good coping mechanism. And I don't want to be addicted to knitting and knitting to procrastinate and avoid doing other things, but it is a hobby that can bring joy and comfort during dark times. So I'm glad that I started using it again, at least in April. I also made this around April 28th. I made it for my mom for Mother's Day. It's all in Castaway by Knit Collage. It was a quick thing I needed to make because I was like, oh, I have to make her something, and I had this leftover Castaway yarn, so I made her this, and I mean, I think it's really pretty. It's like mermaid colors, so I think she liked it. So now I want to talk about things that I'm currently working on. So in May, I think after I made these cowls and they were super easy and nice in the super bulky yarn, I decided I wanted to challenge myself and do something in fingering weight yarn. So fingering weight is really thin yarn, and you use these really thin needles. So if we compare that, these are the largest needles I have. This is the smallest needle. It's like a whole different ball game and much more difficult. I feel like the yarn falls off the needles more often, but it's still rewarding in itself. So I'm making a pair of socks. So like this part is the part of the leg, and then I think right now I'm working on the part where I'm turning it that way. So it's a fun challenge. Here's the other sock. I'm gonna have to put the needles back in and start the turn after, but I just didn't know how to do that, so I had to take a break and then, or actually I had to buy another needle. So while I was waiting for the other needle, I started this side, and then by the time the other needle came, I could start working on turning the sock. I honestly haven't been working on it too much lately, but I obviously did work on it for a bit. But now I was more into finishing my weekender as of recently, and now I'm starting a brand new sweater because I had the urge to make a chunky turtleneck because, I don't know, I was just craving it to wear. So I got this yarn. It's from Malabrigo. The yarn is Rasta, and the color is Coronilla. And yeah, I was knitting this a little bit earlier to show you guys what knitting looks like. So here's the turtleneck, it's folded over. And then right now I'm working on the increases so that it will like fit over my shoulders. So I'm excited to make this sweater, and hopefully I'll be wearing it soon. And honestly, I started this like yesterday. So working on super bulky yarn is just so fast and fulfilling, honestly. But it's a little too fast, so I think once I finish this one, I might make a sweater with fingering weight yarn. That will be a journey, and I'll probably make a few bulky sweaters in the process of working on that one. But it is fun to try new things, and if every sweater I made was just so fast and so easy with super bulky yarn, it wouldn't be as exciting. So it's nice to sprinkle in some easy, super bulky projects with some harder. So far I've done worsted weight sweaters, the Weekender and the pullover and the Marley Bird were all like worsted weight yarns, and I think it's time that I maybe try making a sweater with fingering weight yarn. So that is my knitting journey so far. If you have any questions, feel free to leave them below, and if you want to learn how to knit and maybe you're around me in the Albany area, I'd be happy to teach you because I just really love knitting, and I feel like it's also a great way to kind of hang out with people and talk without feeling awkward because like if anything, you know, you can just like focus on your knitting, but I think it kind of gets you in this flow state where you're more comfortable to talk about anything, and I don't know, for me it just helps me feel more at ease. So back in San Francisco, I was going to like weekly knitting groups, and during quarantine we have done a few Zoom calls. I haven't been as active the past few weeks, but it's just really nice to meet up with other people who are into the same kind of creative projects as you, and you can talk about your different knitting challenges and things you're working on. So I really enjoy the community aspect of knitting as well, and would really like to create something like that around the Albany area, or join that in the Albany area. And even teaching people virtually, I haven't done that yet, but it would be worth a try. But I have taught a bunch of people. I've taught my mom how to knit. I taught some people on a retreat I went on. So I can teach in person, and I'd be curious to see if I can teach online. So if you're curious and if you want a hobby that could help with stress relief and just bring up more creativity, and you just want to make your own sweaters, reach out to me because I would love to teach you. Alright, if you liked this video, please like it. And if you want to see more from me, I post about personal growth and neuroscience, so subscribe if you want to see more. And share this video with any of knitting friends you have, or someone who you think would like to learn how to knit. Alright, bye!